Welcome to the Adapt Podcast, a podcast for executive leaders looking to be successful in the digital age. Get practical tips from successful leaders and listen as digital movers and shakers talk about how they transformed companies into the digital era. Here is your host, Luis Gonzalez.
Welcome to another episode of the Adapt podcast. Today is the number 10 and we have Iaconelli. He's the founder of Zaga. And Zaga helps small and medium healthcare providers to have more control over their purchases and inventory. So, Andre, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to have you in the program here. And welcome. So I would like to invite you to introduce a little bit about yourself so that our audience knows who is Andre. Okay, thank you so much, my friend, and welcome.
Thank you very much yourself, Luis, for the invitation and for the great time to discuss. I'm sure we're going to have a very productive conversation. About myself, not all that much to say, actually. I started my career here in Brazil, kicked off a few years in investment banking, did that for about 4 years, moved between a few international banks, mainly M&A with a few equity transactions. But then I just got kind of tired of the large corporate life. I thought that big banks were very interesting and it was a good way to make money, but they really weren't doing it for me. So because they really weren't doing it for me, I decided to move on. And then I tried to set up a small boutique private equity firm with one of my previous bosses. I always had this dream of becoming an investor, a professional investor. That didn't work out too well. We didn't really manage to fundraise in Brazil. It was a very tricky political time back then. We had a bit of turmoil with the presidency. No one was sure where the country is going to go. A long story short, we didn't really raise the money we needed to raise to set up the firm. And then after that, I was invited kindly to join the operations at Burger King in Europe. So I oversaw finance for Northern Europe for about 2 years. After that, I moved to London. It was a fantastic life experience. Met a lot of people. Learned a lot about the business, was exposed to some master managers, great corporate culture. Everyone speaks about what 3G is as a school to teach you, and I really learned a lot about myself and about how to run a business with them. After that stint in London, I went to Switzerland for a while to oversee the joint venture operations in Europe, so a step up in terms of finance. Then I got to oversee everything which was to do with our joint ventures reporting, with financing, so a lot of financial work in that regard. And then after a few I would say about a year with the company in Switzerland, I decided I was finally ready. I jumped through the hoops. I learned a lot about managerial styles and about how to implement the 3G culture. And I said, you know what, now's my time to become an entrepreneur. And then I moved back to Brazil after a while to set up my own firm. And the idea here was that I was going to take everything which I learned from Europe and everything which I learned throughout my financial career, and I would dedicate it to actually investing in small companies which were mismanaged or which weren't technologically advanced. So companies which really could use from a little bit of experience and a bit of investments in technology to really step up their game. And in Brazil, the largest amount of companies in Brazil, very, very well run by very competent people. But you see there is a lot of this familiarity of people who grew up as entrepreneurs and whose families were entrepreneurs, and they really struggled, but really didn't have the formality and the training of what a proper management is, right? And didn't have the tools, didn't know how to use top of the range software. And then we realized there was this niche where we could make investments in these small firms and then make them profitable as time went by. Very similar to what 3G had done with Ambev, very similar with Burger King. So bringing in that philosophy to the real economy in Brazil. And that's when I started realizing that healthcare in itself was such a fascinating industry and which was just so non-digital, that it became obvious to me that, there was an opportunity there which was unheard of, which was something which I hadn't seen before. And then me alongside my co-founders, we got together and we said, guys, this is the opportunity we need to tackle. Maybe instead of investing in various companies across various spaces, maybe this is what we need to do. We need to transform healthcare in Brazil and transform the way healthcare is distributed in Brazil. Because again, such a developing nation, there's so many things to address in terms of accessibility and availability of healthcare, that maybe this was our calling and this is what we had to do. So by the end of 2019, we had the firm set up, we had everyone on board, we're really going for it. And then since then, we've just had so much success in terms of finding more about the market and just understanding more about the market, just to be able to craft products which really aim to address this issue of healthcare. And I think now we're coming to a point where the company as a whole has matured and the product has matured, and we have a very clear vision of how we want to transform this industry and bring digital transformation to healthcare in Brazil specifically. Because again, as I said, it's a country which really, really will benefit from it. And just the pandemic has recently just made that huge, right?
Yeah.
So now that's what we're doing. We're still aiming to transform
Awesome.
digital healthcare in Brazil.
Really cool. I'm super excited because one of the reasons why I wanted in the show, it was exactly because of the healthcare part, right? I think it's a very, very traditional. Well, I'm not saying everywhere in the world, but in many countries, it's still a very traditional industry area, and I think there's a lot of things to do, and it's a very interesting area. So that's one of the big reasons why I invited you. Thank you so much once again. And it was I was listening to you, and I was thinking about these small family companies, and I was smiling because this is actually one of the problems that we have in Portugal. So we have a lot of industry, but all, or not all, but most of this industry is run by family owners business. And we have an issue from my point of view. Most probably they don't agree, but we have an issue because they traditionally made a lot of money, right? But now things are changing, and now a new generation is coming. And before you were approaching them, and they run the business in their own way, and they were making a lot of money. But times are changing, so
Yeah.
that they are struggling. But the good thing is the next generation is taking over, and I think the next generation is much more pro towards digitalization and all the new technologies, and I really believe the future is going on that direction. But yeah, I was smiling because I think that's very familiar.
A lot of overlap between Portugal and Brazil in a lot of
Yeah,
areas. Yeah,
I think, and we really need it because we need the competitive industry. Otherwise, we are screwed. Andrea, I want to pick up a little bit about your whole career because you travel so much, you lived so much, and it was very interesting, even in different continents, not only different countries but different continents, which is even more interesting. Um, I wanted to pick up on that because you saw so much, and start with the first question. And the first question is, from your point of view, what are the big advantage that digital era, digital age is bringing to the traditional companies? Because you come from financial, you come from banking, you saw so many different things, right? So I'm pretty sure you saw a lot of really old-fashioned things, and now with being in other side of the story, let's say,
yeah.
you see so many other things. So I really would pick up on that one and ask, what are the big advantage that you see for traditional companies in going into the digital age, or take advantage of the digital age?
I think that's a very rich question, specifically because a large portion of what we're doing here at Zaga is inspired by what digital transformation we've seen in other countries. So again, just a bit of context here. We at Zaga, we're very focused on the procurement side of healthcare. We're very focused on how goods and services flow within the value chain until they reach the point of care, not necessarily the patient itself. And that's the huge difference between what traditional health tech startups have been doing, especially in Brazil, and what we're trying to achieve. And I know that it may look a lot less glamorous, right? So a lot of, especially during COVID, you've heard so much about how we need to transform the way we approach patients, how we monitor patients' health, and how we deal with the outcomes of healthcare scenarios to patients. But what a lot of the things which we haven't stressed is, how do we actually get the materials and the supplies that people need to deal with these patients to the end point of care? And I'm not sure if you had that in Portugal, but at least here in Brazil, we had a massive blackout and a shortage of
Yes,
materials which were needed.
I think it was all over the world, right? So
Yeah,
especially when countries were needing of surgical masks, it was crazy. So I even have some of my friends that with some economical power, they rented planes
yeah,
from China to bring masks. It was
wow,
crazy, 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 crazy. The
yeah.
whole logistic, the whole value stream was completely stuck. It was incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's just the manifestation of, I'd say, um, the old school way of doing business, which is very very focused on the streamlined approach, so the very linear approach to supply chain, which is also a very linear approach to so many things which we see in our lives, right? And you mentioned finance. I think that before you used to have single providers of large scale credit, and you had to go to a bank for financing. You'd have to tap into public markets. Nowadays, we have peer to peer lending and the decentralized finance. You have blockchain. You have the Robinhood evolution, which brought the sort of investment to the masses in the US. You have all these business models and all these product models which depend on decentralized, I'd say, network effects to tap in and to bring in value to participants. If you look at the way companies were traditionally run, I mean, and this is not something which is new. I'm sure that you must have discussed this in the past with a lot of your guests in the podcast. But if you look at the way value was created, it was a very mechanistic approach where you would have a production line of value, and you'd buy supplies, and you'd transform these supplies, then you'd deliver a final product. But services, same thing. You'd buy supplies in terms of talent. You'd hire good talent. They would churn out product, which would be a consulting deck or something of the sort, and you'd charge the service for that. I think that digital transformation in the digital age allows us to think about value in a very different point of view, and it allows us to approach value with a very innovative mindset. And I say this because if I look at the peers which I have in my country and in my space specifically, you see a lot of people try to iterate the same tried and tested model of SaaS, for example. So they'll try to build a product which is scalable, they'll try to distribute that for the lowest bidder, and then they'll try and gain critical mass, and with that achieve profitability. I'm not saying that's not a good product of doing it. I mean, look at Salesforce, look at Asana, look at all of the companies we know which are great SaaS companies.
Yeah.
But I think that they failed to leverage, I think, fundamental shifts in the way we consume goods and services, which is the much more interconnected and the much more positive feedback loop for this iteration. So I know that it's not the best example because Clubhouse had its peak and now it's kind of ebbing. But if you look at the way that Clubhouse leveraged the way that people interconnect to produce exponential value, the creator economy, as we would call it, with TikTok, with whatever you else have it, you can bring that mentality to so many offline businesses and then just use the community to leverage that up. I think that the greatest advent of the digital transformation age is to allow us to look at these new business models and say, maybe there's a way I can rethink manufacturing, which will leverage the community up and that will allow us to scale and allow us to deliver more value with a lot more iterations and feedback from the customer. So I think that that's a huge opportunity. If we look at the ways of how we can transform the way we perceive businesses into a digital age, I think we have so much things to do.
Well, that was very interesting. You touched on two things. One thing, it popped up quite a lot here, which is basically digital transformation is not about changing or a lot. One of the peers a lot is digital transformation is not about technology. You touched on the business models, which I fully agree, right? So if you think about Uber, Airbnb, so those are pretty good examples how they basically create a revolution in the industry. But another one that you brought that no one ever brought to the show, even myself, I never saw it. It's the community. The community, indeed, it's very, very, very powerful. And even myself, this podcast in reality it has a purpose, right? It's to create a community, it's to help leaders to succeed. And at the end, my hope is to build a community of leaders that can cause an impact in the world, right? So right here, I'm trying a little bit of what you're saying, but it's very interesting because, the podcast is a very, very interesting informal community. But even in my company, what we try to do is to create a community of customers and utilize that knowledge and that community to generate new products, new service, new ideas, new feedback loops, like you said. And I even asked my previous customers to validate ideas for new service and new service, new products. And it's very interesting how companies do not utilize that. And just to close this topic, I wanted to share when I was working in Nokia in 2010. I was working in Nokia in what they call here.com. Basically, was the maps navigation system. It was a competitor of Google, and we care so much with our community that we were flying once a year. We were flying the most active users of our community from all over the world to Berlin. So basically, we hosted huge parties and really sessions on the new features. We were giving them access to new features that no one could have access to that in the current versions. Why? Because basically the maps was the app was so successful because we had really crazy members in the community. They were testing it over the weekend, nights, days, and they were providing. They even have direct access to our teams, the development team. And it's interesting, you think about Nokia, you cannot really think that you as a user will have access directly to the development team, but we did, and that actually helped tremendous to build a really really great product by just leveraging the community. So thank you so much for this insight. I never thought about it, and now when I look back, I'm already using it, and we use it in the previous when I was working. We use it in such a nice way. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
this
yeah. I think
insight.
that especially as we evolve, and now that we've all been Facebooked, right? So, not everyone belongs to a community. The community power is just ever growing, right? And people who fail to realize that it's all about connecting and building
Yeah.
that community out, they're going to suffer. They're not going to evolve with the rest of us.
So actually, I'm going to leave here this tip. So maybe from other points of view, one of the big assets that you as a business owner should leverage is your community, because in your digital age, it's very easy to access a virtual community or to create a virtual community on based on your own interest or business interest or whatever. So this is something that you definitely should think about it. Cool. So Andre, and we were talking about all the potential and all the great things. So let's talk about now the bad things, right? So what do you think that are the threats for traditional companies that digital age will impose to them, and what will happen to the traditional, well, we know what will happen to the traditional business that really doesn't will not adapt, right? But what do you think that are the biggest threats living in this age and not being able to adapt? What is your opinion on this topic?
I'd say that the standard answer to your question is that businesses who don't evolve they'll fall behind, and they'll just become these zombie companies which won't have a way forward, and they'll eventually be bought out by Alphabet or by Apple or by someone else who actually sees any reminiscent value in them, or they'll just fizz out and they'll just die and become irrelevant. I think the greatest example of a company which was able to reinvent itself is Walmart. They saw themselves being devoured by online retail, and they became themselves a hub of online retailing, especially because they were able to leverage what they had, which was best, which was their dispersed locations, to use that and build out the digital infrastructure which they needed to become a powerhouse in e-commerce themselves. So I think this is a
But
prime
that's
example.
sorry to interrupt. That's a very interesting one, because that
Yeah,
actually it's a completely shift on the business model,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's not just about technology. So coming back to what we were talking, this is a completely different shift
yeah.
on your business model,
It's the
and that
entire change.
actually
Yeah,
it's entire change, right? You go
yeah,
from you offering the stuff to being a marketplace of just bringing different shops. And actually it's very interesting because basically they create something you can even see, you create a business for your own competitors,
yeah.
right? So it's not a perfect example how actually digital transformation is not about technology, or
Yeah.
most probably will not be the biggest part. Go for it. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
no. It's great. I think it's a great topic, but it really drives the point home that it's all about reimagining the way you do business. I think the downside, and the one which is, I think, less discussed typically, is that to quote the now infamous Spider-Man quote, right? Great power brings great responsibility, and the fact that we, by empowering businesses to have such a dominant um, dominant position within the marketplace and within communities themselves, we're creating the framework for things which could be very destructive overall, right? And I'm
Mm.
thinking about here how things tend to get out of hand on social media. The same movement which you see with politicization and the just polarization of the discourse in social media. You tend to get the same thing in terms of business, and this, I know this is a very far fetched point, so bear with me here. But what
Okay.
I'm trying to say is, because of the power of technology and because of the speed which allows firms to iterate and to innovate, you have two side effects. One of them is very positive, which means it makes evolution much quicker, right? And
Yes.
it allows us to spread much faster. The other is the opposite of positive evolution, which I'm saying is very, very fast change, not necessarily for positive outcomes. Because I think that the market overall is very bad at pricing out bad practices which are very good in the short term but very destructive in the long term. And I'm thinking about here, take into example the way the digital infrastructure for logistics has evolved, and now you have giant warehouses across the country to make last mile logistics viable, right? And this is something which is very positive for the e-commerce standpoint. It's very destructive if you're looking at the local communities, which in turn enable these e-commerces, and then you lose the positive feedback loop, which is to have small shops which sold on Amazon, and then Amazon got this delivered, and then you created this community incentive. The downside of that is that if once you eliminate the dispersed aspect of community and you come back to centralizing things, you lose the power to innovate quickly. I heard about the other day something like none of the alphabet companies make money except for Google. And that's just a shame, because the alphabet companies are what Google really was investing their future in, because they at some point learned that search wasn't going to be as dominant as it is, so we're going to diversify. And I think that in a very convoluted way of explaining it, I feel the downfall of the digital age and the downside of the way we iterate speed is that we sometimes don't really check what the long-term benefit is for the economy in favor of short-term goals, right? And that can lead to companies which are maximizing short-term gain, but are just destroying their long-term power. I'm not sure if I made myself clear in that regard.
No, for sure you made, but it's very, very interesting. But then again, we live in a very capitalist society, right? So we tend to think making a lot of profit and making a lot of cool stuff. If you have a startup, make the startup scale, IPO, make the money, retire. That's it. Right? No, but it's of course, there's a lot of people, we are generalizing here a little bit. There's a lot of people who want to really make an impact in the world. But I agree with you.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a capitalist through and through, and I'm all for scaling and making profits. But I think that if we don't check the way these evolve into sustainable profits, you get something like the WeWork fiasco, which was just a massive uptick, and then people realize, wait, hang on, this isn't that profitable if you look at the numbers, but there's just so much hype. I think that's the one of the downsides. Maybe we're scaling too quickly, things which shouldn't scale too quickly. I think that's my key point here.
Yeah, and we see that every day, right? Every day we see new unicorns coming out, and you start really thinking about that business model. Think, man, that crap doesn't make any money, right? So how the hell can you 1 billion? Very interesting. But I fully agree.
It's a product of the times. I was reading an interesting discussion about driverless technology, which was now coming to age, and there are these two competing streams of driverless technology, right? One of them was built from the ground up with full-on AI and massive sensor loads, and the other one was built more on the evolution of small things which were already present in cars. And it all came down to unit economics and the fact that the marginal evolution of what people were already doing has a massive captive market in terms of automakers. And it may not seem that sexy that you have these sensors which help you to park, these sensors which help you to brake, and they're all adaptive in that sense. Everyone is investing on the massive robo-taxis, and we're not going to need drivers anymore for anything, and that's going to be massive. But just the amount of dollars being burned through and just sizzling through the fire to build out this giant moonshot vis-a-vis the unit economics of making these incremental changes are bringing in massive loads of cash to the smaller companies. And the larger guys, like Alphabet, who invested in Waymo, and all the other people, they're just staying behind, wait, hang on, how much more money do we need to plow into this technology to make it competitive vis-a-vis the smaller and incremental guys? And I think that I really believe in that philosophy that sometimes making small and successive changes, adapting, as you would say, that's the best way forward to evolve instead of just break everything completely.
Right? Yeah. Very interesting point. Good. So now we go to the biggest reason why I invited you, which is digital transformation on the healthcare, and I'm very, very interested because I'm giving the example where how I lived, and here in Portugal, it's hilarious, right? Because everyone thinks, at least government think, that digital transformation is putting something online, and we are digital. Right, so I saw a bunch of politicians in the TV saying how great we are and how fast we change for digital and how much appointments you can take now online, blah 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 blah. But in reality, from my point of view, that's not digital transformation at all. You are just basically changing the channel how you receive patients. Before it was face to face, and now you have a Zoom call. So of course, I'm simplifying quite a lot, right? And not really being fair, but it's just to for us to understand a little bit. So what I would love to know is how are you guys actually helping the digital transformation, the healthcare, and how where it will it go? So you said that in the beginning of the show they have a very clear vision where it should go from your point of view, and this of course is your view, but I really would love to hear a little bit about that. So what are you guys doing to help the providers, and where do you think healthcare will be in 10-15 years with all transformation that's ongoing?
Nice. That's a very large question. I'll try to be brief. I'll try to be brief. As I said, I mean, I think there's a lot of emphasis on how we get patients to hospitals and to doctors, in terms of how do we treat lives instead of how do we treat disease. And if you look at all of the company, a large portion of the companies, I'm sorry, not all of the companies, a large portion of companies which have aimed to address the healthcare issue are very focused on access, right? And that's something because, especially in the developing world, the ratio of doctors to patients is very low. So it's very hard to get face to face with a doctor. The distances between points of care and humans are sometimes continental. So Brazil, take that as an example. We may have a lot of doctors per inhabitant. They're all concentrated in my city. If you're in the upstate or the Amazon rainforest, it's very hard for you to get to a doctor. So of course, Zoom makes a load of sense, right? And of course, awesome to have digital medicine in that regard. But I think that this is a manifestation of what something you touched upon, saying that, right, it's not really because we're having a virtual conversation that we've made the process digital. We're just cutting out the legwork of me going to a hospital and then having to see a doctor. Very, very beneficial, huge gains in terms of service. But I think that's the same thing as changing a online meeting, a physical meeting to an online meeting. It's great, but it's still a meeting. And meetings tend
like
to be
I said, it's an incremental evolution, and it's very welcome, right? But
it is. No,
we are trying to get the big step here. So go for it.
But what I'm trying to say is that maybe we need to think about how, and what we're trying to do, and our emphasis here is we are shifting the focus from how do we get patients in front of healthcare providers to how do we rethink the healthcare providing as a whole. So I'm lucky enough to be in an ecosystem of startups here in Brazil, which are looking at how we can rethink the process. And one of the funds who invests in us as a company also has a few portfolio companies which are reimagining the way people interact with their doctors and they re-interact with medicine overall. We took the same approach, and we took this concept of, if you look at healthcare as being an integrated system where you have from the most basic general practitioner to the most advanced neurosurgeon performing very, very complex and specific tasks, you have a wide spectrum of people who share pretty much the same problem, which is, regardless of what you're doing in healthcare, you need to get supplies to do it. You need to get gloves, you need to get syringes, you need to get specific medications, swabs, you name it. And that's a very unsexy problem, right? Because if you look at the way what is sexy and what people identify is how they can benefit their healthcare. Because to them, a syringe is a syringe. They don't really care how it gets to their doctor. What we did was we tried to reimagine the fact that maybe if we can free up time and if we can free up resources in purchasing this syringe, if we can automate distribution based on patient behaviors, and if we can automate what gets to what point of care quicker, we can save a lot of money and a lot of time in the process overall, and as a knock-on effect, reduce the prices of healthcare, especially in developing countries. So I'll paint you a picture, right? The majority of the digital transformation which we've seen thus far in the space, specifically of healthcare procurement, is very similar to making a Zoom call instead of having an in-person meeting. It's a digital tool to make the communication faster, but it still depends on a human talking to a human. And that's fine. As I said, incremental leaps, right? What we're doing is much closer to replacing one of the sides of the human by AI, and in that, making decision-making a lot quicker. So I'm sure you know you touched upon finance, right? I'm sure you know algorithmic trading and the way that computers have been used to speed up transactions in financial markets and to optimize portfolios. What we're trying to do is the exact same thing, except instead of moving dollars around, we're moving products around based on who's consuming these, where they're consuming this, and how fast we can get replacements for these products. Again, an unsexy problem. No one was really looking at it, but if you look at the inefficiency of humans talking to humans, specifically in procurement, with so many variables, it's very, very large.
Yes.
So what we're trying to do is we're using the solution, right, which is basically empowering people at the very long tail of the provider healthcare, the smallest clinic in the smallest town in the country. We're giving them a solution which is very simple, very effective. And in that, we are opening a channel where we can supply these very small clinics directly at a much lower cost than the typical incumbents would. And in that, we're bringing about what we call the democratization of healthcare and the access of healthcare, not through the patient side, but through the supply side. And that's our grand vision for the future, to be connected and to be the network, the infrastructure through which everything which is healthcare based flows, all of the products, all of the data, everything which we can do to maximize this point of care efficiency is what we're trying to do at the end of the day.
That's awesome. In reality, you focus on the healthcare, but in reality, everything what you are saying, it can be applied to any supply chain problem, right? So anything that you have demand supply, you have a value chain that you need to deliver goods from point A to point B. It's something that can use AI to help you
optimize
there.
for it. Yeah.
I remember I read in one of my courses that I took in MIT, that the professor gave one example which was very interesting. So there was like retail company using weather forecast actually as well to predict the need of stock. So for example, they were giving an example, summer is coming and the forecast says that it will be hot, so most probably there will be a lot of beer that is needed. Right,
Which
so
makes total sense. Yeah.
yes, but it's we are making fun, but it's not, it's a funny example, but it's really true. It's interesting. You see, weather is coming, demand will increase, so let's make sure that we order more beer because we need more beer on stock because people will come and buy it, or barbecue, whatever, right? So it's a very, very interesting problem that I think it can save millions and millions and millions in dollars and optimize the supply chain. I think it's a very interesting problem to solve. When COVID showed that we have a huge problem, right? And it's not just about the mask, everything during COVID, right? I ordered a kitchen, took weeks. Tiles were broken. Factories in Italy could not produce whatever. Man, the entire supply chain all over the world, it was disrupted. So it was not just about the medical stuff. It was the entire because travel, we could not, the trucks could not pass, or the countries were blocking because of, man, you name it, right? So it was really, really crazy, and everything got really, really disrupted. And it's and I heard that there are a lot of companies now start to look at the logistic part, the supply chain part, and how do we reinvent the entire traditional supply chain industry in a way that we don't suffer so much out of it. Good.
Yeah.
So we have two more questions for the show. One is, what was your biggest lesson? Okay, as a leader, let's focus on the leadership. So what was your biggest lesson in your leadership career? And the last one to close the show is, what kind of advices do you give to people that are entering in leadership positions? They want to start their career and they really don't know where to start or what to do. So what are your advices for them?
So many. I think the biggest lesson I've yet to learn, let's put it this way, I haven't mastered it yet, but I know that it's relevant and it's important in the development of what I'm trying to achieve, specifically as a business owner and as an entrepreneur. I think that the key lesson, the key takeaway is just learn that you're really not as good as you think you are when you get into it.
I like
So
that.
when I was a young guy in university, right, and I was younger, I was a good student. I was making good grades, and I said, you know what, this is easy. This is, I've won at life. I'm coming from a good university. I've got good parents. I've got a good family background. Sure, this is very easy. I'm gonna own this. And then soon I started realizing that actually I didn't know anything about what I was doing, and I was just this arrogant little kid who was lost for absolute most part of what he's doing. And what I realized time and time again, especially when I started investing for myself and becoming an entrepreneur myself, was that dealing with failure and dealing with learning that you're not there yet is the key point which you want to drive forward. And it's very cool because this correlates directly with what you're trying to do, right? Which is to adapt and to evolve. And evolving and evolution and adaptation is just hitting your head against the wall and saying, oh, hang on, maybe I should tackle this differently. But when you're there, when you think you're the hot shot and you're the cream of the crop, dealing with failure is just so difficult. Because you're coming from a mindset of just, I've succeeded at everything I've tried.
I'm listening to what you are saying, and it's so damn interesting because I'm still a very young guy. I'm 42, but I started my career almost 20 years ago. And listen to what you are saying. It's very interesting because before, when I was not able to succeed, I was getting really pissed off, right? So I was doing something and I was pissed off because it did not work, and I tried again and again, pissed off because it did not work. And now it's so different. Now it's very interesting. I even had this conversation with a couple of friends a couple of months ago, because now when something goes wrong, I smile, I say, wow, what can I learn from it? And honestly, I'm not pissed off anymore, right? So of course, if it's business stuff, sometimes it's some serious stuff. So of course you get pissed off, but the attitude is very, very, very different. The attitude now that I have is, what is the lesson to learn from here? So what did it go wrong that I learned that I should not do the same the next time? So, and I was listening to you, and it was very interesting. So the mindset, and now I most even have fun by failing, just for the fact that people are listening to this and they think this guy is completely nuts. But yeah, now I try to focus really on the learning part. It's okay, it failed, great. But what is
can
the
you do it
learning
every
part?
time? Did you manage to do it every time? Because that's where I still struggle. There are a few failures which still piss me off, and I'm like, man, you're such an idiot. You should have done that instead of this. How do you deal with that every time?
No, of course I have the same feelings. Of course I think you are an idiot. That was so basic. It was in front of your eyes. But then a couple of minutes later, then you think, okay, so what did you learn out of it, right? Because and even in life, right? Even in life, I was a couple of weeks ago, I had a dinner with a person, and the dinner went horrible wrong. And if it would be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I was really pissed off and thinking, oh my God, what a waste of my time. And I remember arriving home, and man, it was ridiculous. I was laughing because thinking, very interesting. I learned a lot about what happened tonight, right? And I was smiling instead of getting really pissed off with something going really deeply wrong. I was smiling and saying, there was a lot of stuff to learn from it. And again, I'm saying again, people are listening to these guys, to this show, and they're thinking, my God, this guy is completely nuts. But I think that comes with age, and I think is because. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think this will come even more with entrepreneurs, because I think that we have so much control and power about doing stuff that we don't need to care. We just do it because we have the power. We are the owners of the company, so we can just do whatever we want. So we will screw up much harder and much more often than if you are working in a normal company, because you will always have the boss that will not allow you because it's traditional, or because his experience knows that you will screw it up. So I think as an entrepreneur, it's much easier to fail. And I think then basically it's like when we were young, trying to hit on the nice girls in the bar, right? And in the beginning, you are very shy and you are afraid of going there. And then, if she says no, and then you just start to take no's. After a while, it's like, it's okay. So it's just, you just take it with much more naturality than before. And I think it's the same with the companies, right? You just start to fail.
You build a thicker skin.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, a lot of people think that successful companies, they everyone can create a Facebook, right? And Zuckerberg is the first one to say, before Facebook, I failed so many times. Facebook was the lottery, right? And that was a very good point. Sorry, I got excited because I think
it's great. It's great.
It was a very good one. So
share that.
What are the big advice that you would give to the young So we already gave a little bit with the first one, but what would be
The
the big
wise men.
advice?
I feel so wise now and so beyond my years. Um, no, but I think the main advice really follows in the back of what we were just discussing, and the fact that I'm a firm reader of Stoicism, and once you sort of incorporate the fact that you really don't know what you're doing and you're going to fail for many of the times, I think the biggest advice I can give you is sort of just go with the flow and don't turn your nose up to anything which comes your way. You never know when that one dinner where you're just kind of like, I'm not sure I want to go to that, might turn into a business partner, might turn into a huge opportunity for you. You never know when a job prospect which shows up for something which you're really not that passionate about, but sure, why not? Let's try it. I think that being open to taking risks, especially if you have the entrepreneurial vein and if you want to make something which is off the beaten path, taking risks is the number one thing you must do. And to take risks, you got to accept that maybe sometimes I'm going to get it right, maybe sometimes I'm going to get it wrong. But never say no to anything, and never think that you're above anything. Be it a task. So I need to edit that slide last minute for a presentation. I need to go carry some boxes in the warehouse because something needs to get shipped by tomorrow. If you don't think that any task is beneath you, there's so much you can learn, and there's so many opportunities which you're going to present yourself, and you never know when something might just show up because you said, yeah, sure, I'll try that. So I think that's my main thing. Just be curious, just be creative, just be open to it, because something that you never know what's going to happen. That's my main point.
That's interesting. I remember what you're saying. I listen to what you're saying, and some of the best opportunities, business opportunities that I got were the ones that I saw that I'm going to call and say I'm sick. I cannot make it. And at the end of the day, actually, I went there and turned out that I got really good business and really good partnerships out of it. So I fully agree. And if you want to be an entrepreneur or a leader, I think you always need to keep your eyes open. Otherwise, you might miss very interesting chances.
And push yourself, right? I mean, I think the corollary here is if you want to take risks and you want to escape your comfort zone, I mean, you can't be an entrepreneur in your comfort zone. If you're comfortable where you are, you're not evolving, right? And if you're not evolving, what can you do? And we as humans tend to be very complacent and saying, I'm not really a fan of those guys. I'm not going to bother going out for dinner with them. And then that's where it happens. The interesting ideas happens when you're outside your comfort zone. So push yourself always to be beyond it. That's my main point.
Yeah, I fully agree. Man, it was such a good one. I really love this episode. Thank you so much for being here. So I will leave so everyone that wants to know more about Andre, I will leave his LinkedIn in the show notes, his company for this link for his company. So if anyone wants to know more about how Andre is helping the healthcare to become top priority in Brazil on the digital era, just contact him. Andre, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure, and man, all the best for you and for Zaga.
Thank you very much, Luis. The pleasure was all mine. I wish all your listeners had a great time, and I'd love to speak to you again very soon. Thank you very much, guys.
See you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Adapt podcast. Head on over to www.adaptmethodology.com/scorecard to benchmark your ability as a leader to adapt your entire organization to the digital era. You will be able to identify plenty of opportunities for leveraged growth.